You join us for a session on the West and the world after Iraq. We have the privilege of having a class from American University with us today. We're pleased to have you all here, and I will just let you know that there will be time at the end of the session for questions, and I hope you will have some questions to put to our speaker. We would look forward to that. Our guest today is Pierre Hassner, Professor Emeritus of Political Science and International Relations at the Institut d'Etudes Politiques in Paris, one of the leading authorities on international relations and international security. Professor Hassner has taught at the Johns Hopkins European Center in Bologna, at Harvard University, at the University of Chicago, and is presently teaching at the University of Quebec in Montreal as a visiting professor. He has been a fellow and a guest scholar at the Wilson Center and has published a vast number of articles and a number of books on issues ranging from ethics to the Balkans to international relations, Eastern Europe, transatlantic relations, and issues in the Cold War. In 2005, he received the prestigious Tocqueville Prize, which is awarded every 2 years in France to a distinguished public intellectual. In 2003, he had been presented a volume of essays in his honor, indicating the range of his interests and publications, which was entitled in French, From Kant to Kosovo, edited by two friends and former scholars at the Wilson Center, who were both colleagues and students of Pierre's, Anne-Marie Le Gloanec and Alexander Smolar. There were over 30 contributors, all of whom were colleagues and students with Professor Hassner. So today, well, let me just say that this is actually, a few of you were present last night when Pierre delivered a lecture on the Russian transition to autocracy at the National Endowment for Democracy, presented at the Canadian Embassy. And in a sense, some of his remarks today will be the opposite side of that coin, not looking at necessarily the implications of the Russian developments, but more at, in the face of Russia, Middle East, China's emergence, and all of the other things that are going on, what will the West do, and how coherent can its policies be in the face of quite a range of challenges? So, Pierre, we look forward to your remarks.
Thank you very much, Sam. It's always a pleasure to be here. I make it a point every time I am on this continent, which used to happen more frequently before, but still to come here, at least to see Sam, his colleagues, and if possible to have greater contact here, where I spent several months back in 1981, and we've been in touch ever since. Well, Sam has introduced it very well. I won't enter very much in what I mean by the West or what I mean by the world. I only want to preface it by this kind of personal statement. I'm talking as a pro-American European, but who is deeply worried both by the state of Europe and by the relations of America with the world. And my talk is based on a paper I've done in two versions, one in an article in the American Interest in July, August of this year, where I start. The title wasn't mine, but it's very pompous. It's called The Fate of a Century. But the question I was raising was inspired by a colleague from Bulgaria, Ivan Krastev, who is very pro-American, but who wrote an article called The Anti-American Century, saying that one thought there was a group for a new American century, but it looks more that in the world, with the exception of Israel and of parts of Eastern Europe, the world cannot agree on anything except on being anti-American. And the question, so he was very pessimistic, saying maybe it's going to be the anti-American century and maybe the end of the plan for the freedom century. I am also pessimistically inclined, but not so apocalyptically one. And I am the central question, which I can't answer, but which I want to raise, is expressed in this formulation: how can we act for our values and our interests, for peace and for freedom, in a world which we, the West, can no longer dominate, where our position is going to be less and less central, and where our legitimacy, both as judges and as educators, is more and more contested? So that is the thing that we must realize, at least in my view, that we are in a deep crisis. And I'm surprised in a way by how people seem to be either unaware of it or ready perhaps to make things worse in the case if there is a military solution to the Iranian problem. Since I was on this continent, since I'm teaching in Montreal, I saw two articles which really surprised me very much, especially the second one. The first one by Bob Kagan, whom I think most of us know about, and who is perhaps even more known in Europe because he made this resounding article with this formula: Americans are from Mars and Europeans are from Venus. Americans are warriors and know that the world is bad and we have to use power, and by power it means military force, whereas the Europeans now believe only in negotiation, integration, and this is because they are protected by America, and so on. That was his old thesis, but now he's written in the same review, Policy Review, another article saying the end of the dreams about internationalism, UN, and so on. Now we are in the real world of countries competing, balance of power, but essentially they are the authoritarians and liberal or free democratic people. There is something to that. I was talking yesterday about the trend towards capitalist authoritarianism, as one says, Russia and China. But still, the end of the dreams, what about the dream of the benevolent empire, of everybody accepting, as he was saying in the original article, except possibly the French, was accepting the beneficence of American hegemony, and so on. It seems to me a quite different world. And the other article was in the New Republic in October by Walter Russell Means, who is not a neoconservative, who is at the Council of Foreign Relations, and who has an article called Failing Upwards, saying that America has no good strategy, that the Great Plan never works, that it made every mistake in the world since the beginning of the 20th century, but that it always turned up for the best, it always came out on top of the various crises. So he says there are a couple of details, two world wars which could have been avoided, but they weren't avoided, and still America came well. And now in the Middle East, it wasn't it wasn't so good, but still, basically, it gave a sense. Now the threat of Iran gathered the Arab countries like Saudi Arabia and Egypt closer to Israel and to the United States, and in Asia, India and Japan are closer. So everything is well. He compares America to Mr. Magoo, who is always blundering, but finally it comes on top. And to me, this seems completely unreal, leaving aside that even for Americans, the two world wars are not a small thing. But even domestically, the crisis caused by Vietnam in the American society and politics, and now by 9/11, I don't say that 9/11 wouldn't have happened anyway. Some people say it's because of American policy and so on. But my point is, whichever, I'll touch it very lightly, what is the fault of American policy, what is the fault of trends which were predictable, were already existing and in control. But it seems to me that people don't get the new situation in which we are. And the Europeans perhaps understanding a little better, but this was a part of Kagan's article which I thought unfortunately had some truth, don't seem to be able to get their act together or indeed to act at all in this new environment. So it seems to me we are in a kind of a third phase after the Berlin, after the Cold War, the end of the Berlin Wall. There was this period of relative euphoria in the 90s where we all thought about democratization of the world and about our present foreign minister Kushner was promoting the droit d'ingérence, the right of intervention, and Frank Fukuyama was saying it's the end of history. The liberal world, free society and the market had won. Michael Mandelbaum was saying the ideas which won. Wilson was a bad statesman but a good prophet. We are in a Wilsonian world. And it seems to me that at least since 2003, and one can say since 9/11, we are in another phase which is much more brutal, in which we have new challenges and in which we must adapt our policies to this new situation. So there are things which were the thing that the new role of Asia as compared with Europe has been predicted for a very long time, but now the surge of China and of India has accelerated and has become so important that in a way we are dependent, the United States in particular is dependent on China financially for underwriting the American budget by buying bond de trésor, how one says, American bonds. There is this new situation where when one doesn't know, in classical terms, one always said there is no balancing to the American power, but nobody knows what will be the case 20 years from now. Their peaceful ascent is precisely meant to reassure, and maybe they will become just another Japan, very capitalistic, or maybe they'll have the crisis with their very serious social problems or the lack of legitimacy of a communist party in a capitalist country. One doesn't know, but one does know that they keep saying, as Deng Xiaoping said to a German friend of mine, Lothar Rühl, and for the next 50 years our plan is to make China respectable and respected country. Then we'll see. And in this then we'll see is a whole uncertainty. So this was predicted and was known. We knew about the problems in the Middle East and so on. But the surge of Islam also was not just created by, it was created by a number of factors, but I would like to emphasize two very basic long-range phenomena. One, which is technological, the transformation in the means of communication and in the means of destruction, the fact that with all the money flowing around, a group of people can do the harm to a complex society which one expected only from states, and that the ratio of the difference in power between states and groups of individuals or small states may be declining, accession to the bomb, or simply a lot of ways in which people can resist or can destroy. And the other technological thing, the revolution in communications, the fact that everything is known immediately, and this raises problems for intervention abroad. In the 19th century, Britain and France, to take these two examples, could have very decent policies at home and have a very brutal repression abroad in India or in Madagascar or Algeria or indeed in Iraq for the British in the 20s. But now everything is immediately on the internet, on the television, on photos at home. So there is a world in which some people say there is a globalization of solidarity and so on. But there is also a globalization of resentment, of hatred, even for people who are very distant. And on the other hand, there is the cultural problem of modernization, globalization, which goes forward, but where including democracy, it's seen by in very great part of the world as disrupting their society, as bringing corruption, as Cora Bell said, the evolution of the West itself with things which are the most justified and cherished, like liberation of women, is seen as part of a great conspiracy against the traditional society or against Islam or so on. So these are factors which were not created by the United States at all. But I think everything has been very greatly aggravated by the Iraq war, which has shattered both the belief in American power and the belief in American legitimacy or exemplarity. And this has made this, I think now everybody is against, everybody, a majority is against the Iraq war retrospectively and thinks one way or the other one should get out. But still, this sense that we are no longer in a position to decide from outside who is going to be democratic or not, and who is going to do this or that. We lost the ability to do that, and that you are in a world where, to finish the thought I was trying to say, I have this the effect of having too many parentheses, the asymmetry in power has decreased. We have more and more trouble in projecting our power with good effect, and on the other hand, with the appearance of people who accept or court suicide of absolute religion and so on, the asymmetry or heterogeneity, to use a barbaric word, forward in values, in views of the world, is perhaps greater than during the time of the Cold War. So I see the world very heterogeneous, where there are states, there are great powers. The United States is the greatest among them, only one which can project military power everywhere. It has its fundamental health translated perhaps in its demography, which is still good, whereas Russia is in a terrible state, but most of Europe, not so much France, but the Mediterranean countries, Italy, Spain, and so on, and Germany, are losing. I think there are many things which are still there, but at the same time, in this new world, it seems to me there is a lot of factors which relativize, which I would like to have another word than relativize. How does one say? Which in Italian one would say ridimensionare, which are cutting down to size the effect of this power because there are these other factors. And the least, in a way, unexpected for Americans is rise of other powers. One always was expecting it, and America has always come on top from the German or Russian challenge, from the Japanese or Chinese challenge. That is not really the problem. But the fact that a lot of smaller powers cannot really assert their independence, and that, for instance, on Iraq, on the resolution in the UN, the United States couldn't have Mexico and Chile vote with it, and that you have now people like, thanks to oil, Mr. Chavez, something is known at the United States, and this kind of coalition of anti-American powers, symbolized by this. There's an old plane which twice a week goes from Tehran through Damas to Caracas. It's not a very normal route, but it's meant to symbolize the alliance of Iran, Syria, and Venezuela, not to speak of Castro and so on. There is that. There is the fact of, as I said, of groups, the return of kind of Middle Ages where there are private armies all over the place, from terrorists to mercenaries, and so on. And there is this kind of diffuse feeling of public opinion everywhere. I was giving a lecture yesterday blasting Putin and the autocracy in Russia. But when Putin, one saw it on television, was saying to Bush, your democracy, if it's democracy like Iraq, thank you very much. You know, that I think the whole world, from enemies to friends of America, was thinking touche. He has a point there. And the question is how to avoid that. And again, it's not a question of admitting defeat. It's a question of seeing how I was taking in my article 3 things: intervention, non-proliferation, and democratization, to see that on each, it seems to me, we have to adopt a much more complex, much more often indirect strategy than this kind of frontal attack which we are used to, or this kind of preaching from high ground which we were used to also. On intervention, it's really strange when one sees that one has the impression that liberal democracies either stay too little or stay too long. There is, we know that you can't go away after you can win a stunning victory, and even but after and then cry victory and the end of major operations. But then the whole issue is nowadays no longer the winning of a given battle or a given territory. It's a long-range effect on the society and on the public opinion in the rest of the world and at home in the mother country, in the intervening country. And that one can say that one is taking a lot to transform a country. But on the other hand, one is very often staying too much for one's welcome. That the liberators appear as occupiers fairly quickly, and that they cannot solve the domestic conflicts and so on. So this is a quandary where I think I was an ardent proponent of intervention in Yugoslavia, in Bosnia, and I even though both Bosnia and Kosovo are a little bit of a mess and the problem is not solved, but I don't regret it. I think it's still better than having Milosevic do other Srebrenicas and so on. So one has to intervene in the case of an imminent attack or of a genocide and so on. But normally all these factors combine in the fact that one is in this world, and I should have emphasized that from the beginning. I said that in the other talk, where we depend on people who are not friendly to us, that we have this uncomfortable situation of people whom we need. We need China for North Korea. We need Russia for Iran. And at the same time, these are people who are both cooperate with us, have interdependence with us, but also want to push us back to take our place and have certainly not the same values. So it reminds one more of the situation in the interwar period, or in a way that where there was this triangular thing with Nazis and Stalinists, but now it's even more complicated. So one has to weigh very carefully where one can intervene directly, where one has to enter into unsavory dealings, because it seems to me because one needs the Russians there. One was very quiet on Chechnya, and at least the Europeans were not at all enthusiastic in getting Ukraine in Europe and so on, because they didn't want to have a conflict with Russia. So our most sacred things with human rights and so on have to be weighed and compromised with other interests. So you'll say, what else is new? We knew that, but all the thing is how to combine it, because in our world we cannot say we let autocrats be autocrats. One day they'll become democrats, or let people establish their national identity by ethnic cleansing and by revolution and so on. This is what happened to us. It took us centuries. Why should they? Some people make the argument, let them fight, don't stop artificially, and one day. But you can't do that really in today's world. When we see the horrors here and there, we feel we must do something. So how to combine I was saying yesterday, if it is not a contradiction, one needs a Kissinger with principles or with morality. So to have both maneuvering, but never to lose sight of the basic thing. This is my little message. I don't think I have the time to go. I touched a little bit on intervention. I alluded to democratization. I'll end with the other thing, proliferation, and the Iran thing, which is in the minds of all of us. And here again, it seems to me we are really in a quandary, because I do not take the easy position which many people have, especially in France with the doctrine of nuclear deterrence, and also some, there is an Israeli strategist, Martin van Creven, Roosevelt, who keeps saying, well, even one always thought it's a catastrophe when there is a new nuclear power, but once you have a nuclear power, you become reasonable. There is no guarantee of that if you expect the return of the Mahdi or if you welcome suicide. But it seems to me that nuclear proliferation is becoming more dangerous for reasons which are both technical, political, and cultural. Nuclear weapons are easier to acquire. Their use is less unthinkable because the risk of seeing them fall into the hands of fanatics who don't believe in deterrence because they accept or even welcome suicide is less negligible. That is true, but it seems to me it can at best be slowed down and made less catastrophic. One is not going to slow it. Even suppose, which I'll say in a moment I think is not true, that one could considerably slowed down Iran's nuclear effort by military means and so on. I don't think that guarantees us against a nuclear race in the Middle East, which is certainly a real serious danger. Everybody says, look, and now that Iran looks like getting the bomb, now Saudi Arabia, maybe they have it already through their Pakistan connection, maybe Egypt and so on. That's very true, but they won't trust the fact that one destroyed an unknown part of Iran's nuclear installations. They will know and feel that one day there are the dangers from the conversion from civil nuclear to military one, on which people like Albert Wolstetter had been warning for a long time. So I think it cannot be stopped. It's very dangerous, but we have to live with it while trying by arms control, by denuclearized zone, by different things to make it less catastrophic. And thirdly, the present nuclear order with NPT, the Treaty on Non-Proliferation, has lost much of its legitimacy and credibility in the non-Western world. It was always a kind of a bargain in which we kept our nuclear weapons, and but were going towards disarmament, and they felt protected, and at the same time were not going into this direction. This has been relatively successful, but I think that all over the world, the idea, if you have it, it's good, but if we have it, it's the end of the world, no longer washes. And with the agreement with India, which incidentally may be challenged, not accepted by India because of domestic opposition, I think it has lost even more its credibility. So where was preventive military action? People who don't believe in NPT and so on say we should act. And here is the last point, which to me is obvious, that preventive military actions are extremely dangerous. They have much more chances or risks rather to lead to catastrophic consequences than to solve the problem, because one always has the illusion it's going to be easy, and then one finds oneself bogged down. And there was an American ambassador to Kenya who at the time of Somalia said, if you liked Beirut, you love Mogadishu. And I say, if you like Baghdad, you love Tehran. They had the bigger country. They stood for 8 years against the Iraqis, who were in fact supported both by America, by Russia, by everyone. I think, and the retaliation, there will be perhaps American blood worth or retaliation on Israel. One cannot. The beginning of wisdom, ever since Clausewitz, who said that unpredictability in war, what he called the moral, psychological forces are as important as the military ratio, to now a book which I don't know if it's much discussed here by General Sir Rupert Smith, The Utility of Force, who was a commander in Bosnia, and so on, and says now it's war among the people, and the importance is what effect it has in general. It's not a war between interstate industrial wars which starts and ends. There still are classical wars. Ethiopia versus Eritrea was a classical war, conventional, on a border, on territory, and so on. But this is one episode in something which is much more long range and much more diffuse. And on this, on the relation of the West with the rest of the world, I remember at the time of Dien Bien Phu, now I have more than half a century between my students and me, so when I say Dien Bien Phu, perhaps the younger people here don't know what that means. It means when the French were cornered by the Vietnamese in the Indochina War, and there was serious talk of France asking and America accepting the use of nuclear weapons to Dien Bien Phu. And Eisenhower apparently said, you must be crazy to have a second, for a second time to bomb a country in Asia with nuclear weapons. Do you realize what consequences will have? And in the same way, when one sees that in the Muslim world, even Afghanistan, where I am was very much for the intervention in Afghanistan, and like Iraq, and I think there the Europeans are rather pitiful in their dithering and not engaging them. But even there, in most of the Muslim world, it's seen as an attack against Islam, not an attack against for non-proliferation or against a madman or a dictator like Saddam Hussein was. So it seems to me the danger of having this thing I described in rather somber colors become even much more somber are very, very great. I think I'll stop there. Probably you'll ask me about the Europeans, and I don't know very much how to respond, but I will still stop there.
Thank you, Pierre. We have a couple of microphones, and since this will be available via webcast, we'd like for you to use the microphones in posing your questions and to identify yourself, please. Who would like to start off?
Thank you very much. My name is Aliza Gheorghe, and I'm with the Wilson Center, an intern here. My question would be about transatlantic security and the relation between U.S. and Turkey and the EU, and how will this develop in the near future and maybe on the midterm? Thank you.
Shall I answer every question?
Sure. Let's take them as they go.
Yeah. Well, I wish I knew the answer because again I'm today in a Cassandra mood, and I'm more often pessimistic than optimistic. But I was with the Americans against most Europeans, especially in France, for Turkish entry in European Union. I think there are very serious problems, but still I think one had dangled this carrot in front of them. They made a lot of reforms and so on. Then to tell them, no, after all, it's like de Gaulle discovering that England is an island and saying, no, after all, it can be there. So you say, no. And the suspicion, which is partly true, that this is again anti-Islamic, there are valid questions. Nobody wants millions of Turkish workers all of a sudden and so on. But I thought on balance I was for it. Now, it's a little bit hard for me to understand that the prestige of America or the pro-American feeling, Turkey seems to be the country where it has fallen most precipitously. Is it essentially because of Iraq and the Kurdish problem? But ever since they denied the passage for the troops and so on in Iraq. It has been going downhill, and now the United States, which was always a great advocate of Turkey, and precisely people, the so-called neoconservatives, again their teacher would say that they had almost a Turkish fixation. I remember Richard Pearl at the time of the Cold War, he had the suggestion of bringing Turkish troops on the Central Front because to replace these Germans which were not reliable. The Turks were really reliable, were really good allies. And now, I forgot how much it is. It's 12% pro-Americans in Turkey, so something like that. So everybody has problem. The Turks, for one, they wanted to join Europe. They were on the side of the West, and both the Europeans don't want them. So it creates both much resentment. I'm using shorthand, of course, not all Europeans, but certainly in France, in Netherlands, and in Germany, Angela Merkel, with whom I tend to agree on most things. I think she's a great improvement, but on that, the CDU is really adamant. Sarkozy was saying in his electoral campaign no to Turkey, and so on. So I think it's very bad. So I'm not a Turkish expert, even less than I'm a Russian expert. So where will Turkey go if it feels rejected both by the United States and or if it rejects the United States and is rejected by Europe? Will it turn more Islamist? Is there a secular nationalism, because nationalism seems to be growing everywhere? I just don't know, so I can't really answer you. I'm very sensitive to the problem, but I cannot answer the question.
Stephen Shore.
My name is Stephen Shore.
Just wait for the mic, Stephen. You know the drill.
That the invasion of Iraq was not the most brilliant American foreign policy idea, I think is generally conceded, or even if one liked it in theory, its execution, whatever the theory was, did fall short of whatever the theory was. So where do we go from here?
Again, it seems nobody in the that's the great problem for all the presidential candidates, that they don't have an answer to that. So you can't expect me to have an answer for that. But it's clear, it seems to me, in spite of the successes of the search, that it's still a failure, and the administration won't succeed, and it's clear that after a year the Democrats have failed to come up with a credible solution. So I just don't know. I also share the fact that one has to disengage, except there is a perverse reasoning which Tim Garter-Nash has, saying as long as there is Iraq, at least one won't invade Iran. The day one is gotten rid of Iraq, it becomes more dangerous for invading Iran. But no, I'm like everyone else. One has to disengage, but one cannot disengage from one day to the next. So the question is when, and one would have to gather the neighbors, but now the relations with Iran and Syria are not such. So I think it's the great failure of the administration. It's the thing which determines the congressional elections in 2000, a little more than a year ago, and yet there seems to be a kind of negative consensus. One has to get rid of it, but one doesn't know how, and hence one can argue about whether one should set a date or not a date, and how long or how phased the disengagement should be. Again, going more to the rest of the Middle East, of which again I'm not an expert, I think many people at the center are. When I arrived in 1981, I was terrified because I had to comment on a paper by Dennis Ross and one by Saram Shubin, because that year the subject was the Middle East, and I know Europe, East and West, and a little bit the States and Russia, but not the rest of the world. But still, it seems to me what is emerging as a problem is this kind of playing between Shiites and Sunnites. And the United States first was protecting the Shiites against the Sunnites. Now it's courting the Sunnites against the wishes of the Shiites. And in the region, it seems to be favoring a kind of anti-Sunnite, anti-Shiite coalition, because Iran, who is the great boogeyman, is a Shiite, and the Sunnis are even more against it than against Israel. So then there is these ideas which seem to me improbable, that one is going to have a United States Arab-Israeli coalition against Iran. I don't think that could work. So I think that while one has to say for the time being, and one has to disengage, some of the games which one is playing are really counterproductive. That's what I could say.
Right, absolutely. Rob Leduc?
So can you make comments?
Absolutely, sure.
Okay. Thank you, Pierre, and welcome back.
Yeah.
I know there are many students here, and I hope they were taking notes of the different citations that you referenced in your talk.
Because in Bologna, where I was teaching for a year, and the whole year, but some people were only on second term, so the big joke was those who were arriving were preparing their papers, trying to take notes, and the others who knew me already were smiling at them because they knew how difficult it is to take notes with the speed of my delivery and my long sentences. So good luck if you
Just the parentheses, Pierre.
Well, I'll relieve the students to say there's no quiz after this lecture. But anyway, one book that's been very influential in this country was John Eikenberry's After Victory. And he made the case that the secret to American success after World War II was the embedding of American power in international institutions that made American power legitimate and less threatening to other states. And that as a consequence, during the 1990s, when realist theory would have predicted that the world would balance against this hyperpower, that balancing did not occur. And I think that's a brilliant book that persuasively kind of answers that question. After 9/11, the United States sort of departed from this game plan. And Eikenberry's argued that our secret is to get back to the game plan, the secret of embedding American power in institutions. And there's been discussion in American academia and in the policy circles of whether the French, Russian, German reaction to the intervention in Iraq in 2002, 2003 constituted balancing of American power or not, because of this unilateralist, perceived unilateralist preventive intervention. So on the two sides you have, on the one hand, America, which has seen the limits of unilateralism and is trying to get back to its post-World War II formula for success, and on the European side, a recognition that Chirac's vision of a multipolar world, and there was no phrase that he used that caused more irritation in Washington, is when he said that he wanted a multipolar world, not just a multilateral world, that the Europeans have recognized that multipolarity in a globalized world is not a possibility. So you've seen on both sides, and perhaps that's reflected in the successor governments, Sarkozy, Merkel, etc. But the dilemma is, and I go back to the paper you wrote, Empire of Force or Force of Empire, in which you had, I think, an important reflection that the big problem is the difference on the two sides of the Atlantic in the perception of threat and the origins of it and how that translates into strategy, which is different than the Cold War when there were differences, but at least agreement on the character of the threat. So given that, what I prefaced my question with, this sort of dilemma on the two sides of the Atlantic and the question of embedding power, but but the fact that we still have this problem that the threat perceptions differ on the two sides of Atlantic, how do you see us managing these relationships?
Well, as I say again, I don't really know how, but I would rephrase premises a little bit, because multilateral, there was still I think, as Churchill said, that America after 45, and the Marshall Plan and so on, was the least sordid act in history. It wasn't what the superpowers or empires normally do, divide and rule. He was telling Europeans will help you if you unite. That was really extraordinary, but it was also made possible by the fact that there was an overriding threat which we all recognized, Russia, and that the United States was so much more powerful also economically than Europe and so on, that it could afford to be generous, even though it was predictable that one day Europe would become a competitor. But this being said, you can't go home again. I don't see in today's world, because it seems to me we are not in a unipolar world, contrary to what Kagan still maintains, but you are not in a multipolar world, a nice five power, as also Nixon and Kissinger were speaking of on the model of the European concept, and we are not either in a UN-ruled world and so on, because there is perhaps, although I'm surprising myself, so to speak, because, as I said, I know only the developed world, but I'm more sensitive than others, it seems to me, to the fact that things have changed, where it's no longer simply a question of relations between us. There has been decolonization, there has been the rise of China and India, and there it becomes very different, the UN. It's not entirely false, the perception of the Bush administration, of the neocons, that the UN is unwieldy, is a lot of autocratic people, and especially the fact that, having been, like you, interested in the subject of intervention very much, the fact that everywhere one is blocked by people. I gave the example of China and Russia, but take the African states about Zimbabwe, take the Indian states, including India, about Burma, take the Arab states about Darfur and Sudan. One is everywhere. They are all united on one thing. They like state sovereignty. They don't like, perhaps to protect their tyranny, but they don't like intervention by the UN, by the Security Council. I think the UN also has lost much of its prestige. On the one hand, when one really wants to do something, yesterday in Kosovo, and perhaps tomorrow in Kosovo, the issue is whether if the Russians are blocking, there are going to be unilateral things. One is more and more forced to go outside the UN. The other oldest network of which Hickenberry thinks, the IMF has lost much of its role, and at any rate, the talk is rebalance it. Why should it be an understanding between Americans and Europeans? The director is from one side of the Atlantic, but the other side has a voting majority, and so on. I think all this edifice of Bretton Woods and of NATO and so on is very much now functioning much less well, is in need of adaptation, and one doesn't know why, how to adapt it. Now, to come back, because everybody asks me about the European reactions, and I always say I'm not a specialist on France. I've been on this side of the Atlantic for several months, but I think Chirac one read recently excerpts of the conversation with him. I think what he really thought, I was never an admirer of Chirac, but there he was simply right. I was very much against their rhetoric then, and we'll find this race to the Africans. But when saying you don't know, you've known Vietnam, you are going there, it's easy to get in, but you won't know how to get out, and the fact that a majority of Shiites is against Saddam doesn't mean that they are going to be democratic, and so on. I think he predicted very accurately what was going to happen. On the other hand, he had this idea, which I always was very much against it, that one is going to balance the United States by being nice to the Chinese and to the Russians, whatever they do, which he and Schroeder had, and that was, I think, outrageous. But I think from the beginning, it's a name which is anathema, I'm sure, to some people in the room, but what Steve Walt called taming American power and soft balancing, this has gone on all the time. There wasn't a credible challenger, an opposite coalition, but there was ways, always by dragging one's feet, by so on, to limit American freedom of action. And now I would say there is much more rebalancing, but I always compare to the Battle of Waterloo. You know, it's a thing in France where one was accepting Grouchy, the general on the side of Napoleon, and lo and behold, it wasn't Grouchy, it was Blücher, who was the German marshal who came, and Napoleon lost. So we were the French, the Germans were expecting a world in which there is Europe and Japan, who along with China and Russia rebalance, and all of a sudden it's rebalancing, but it's not Europe which does the rebalancing, it's China. In the end, now the Russians are playing that with Shanghai thing. There is a rapprochement between China and Russia, which I think the Russians in turn play the China card as we meaning Nixon and Kissinger, the West, the United States played the China card against Russia. I'm sure they are not reassured in the long run. They have more to fear about China, but they are all united against. We don't want the West to lecture us and to interfere in our affairs. At the same time, it's limited. It's not a question of military power, and they need the West. They need the trade. They don't want to break with the West, especially the Chinese, not only before the Olympics, but more in the longer run. But I think for the first time there is a real challenge emerging or re-emerging. So this is why, while I sympathize with Eacute argument in the sense that that's what I am too, a liberal internationalist, but I wouldn't put my faith into the rebirth of the institutions solving the problem and replacing multipolarity. I think that is an illusion too, as is, and it's my last word, I know my answers are too long, is that to replace as not only the administration, but to my surprise, some people want to replace the UN by an alliance of democracies. I'm all for democracies working together and for the things which exist, which Madeleine Albright has pushed, and so on, and for a world democratic movement. But I don't think it can replace the UN, because the basic problem is that the alliance of democracies, either one accepts everybody who calls himself themselves a democrat, and the more the country is undemocratic, the more it calls Democratic Republic, Kampuchea, Democratic, and so on. Or who is going to judge who is a member of the club or not? If we do a voluntary association, fine, and I'm part of that, we are all of it. But to say that this is what is going to replace the UN is again this kind of West-centric vision, which has no chance of winning in today's world.
Well, I think some of you may have questions which you can bring to Pierre after the session. I generally try and start and stop as advertised, and let me thank all of you for attending and ask you to join me in thanking our speaker. You remember Paul Kaplan?
For years, oh, I'm sorry I hadn't recognized you first. Although you, in fact, when I look at you,